Okay, we're going to get started. This is the final panel of the day. We're going to have one more speaker after this. So I'd like to introduce Baylen Linnekin. He's the founder and executive director of Keep Food Legal, a Washington, D.C.-based nonpartisan grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates in favor of food freedom, the right of every American to grow, raise, produce, buy, sell, share, cook, eat, and drink the foods of their own choosing. He writes a weekly column on food law and policy issues for Reason Magazine's website, serves as an adjunct faculty member at American University, and will teach food law and policy at George Mason University Law School in the fall of 2014.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much to the Food Law Society and the Animal Legal Defense Society. Sorry. Very happy to be here, and I'm going to introduce the presenters, and then I'm going to step aside, and we'll get to Q&A in about 20 minutes or so. From my left to my far left is Nate Rosenberg, who is the incoming Fink Fellow at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Margiana Petersen-Rockney, who's the founder and organizer of the Young Farmers Network, and Claire Benjamin, who's the managing director of Food Policy Action. They're each going to speak to the themes of our panel, and then we'll have a Q&A that I direct, and then we'll take audience questions. So please give them a warm round of applause, and thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks, Baylen, and thanks to the students who organized this event. So the topic, can you all hear me? I think I'm going to give up on this. The topic of our panel is a broad one, and there are countless policy responses that can help us build a more sustainable and humane meat industry. And hopefully we'll get to discuss some of those during the Q&A. But during my presentation, I want to focus on one particularly thorny problem: the demise of regional and small-scale meatpacking in the United States. So why meatpacking? This quote is from a recent New York Times opinion piece by Nicolette Hahn-Nyman, an environmental lawyer, vegetarian, rancher, and a proponent of sustainable meat production. As Nyman wrote, meatpacking has become a major problem for sustainable meat producers across the country, in places ranging from Mississippi, Vermont, and her own state of California. As you can see on this chart, the number of slaughtering facilities in the United States has fallen drastically in the last 50 years. We now have less than a third of the number of the facilities that we have in 1968, when the USDA first started keeping data on the number of facilities. And as a result, slaughtering livestock and poultry has become a difficult and unnecessarily expensive enterprise for small-scale and sustainable producers. The number of slaughtering facilities has continued to fall over the last 20 years, even as demand for local and sustainable meat has skyrocketed. And while the number of farmers markets, which I think can serve as a good proxy for demand for these type of products, has more than quadrupled since 1994, the number of slaughtering facilities in the United States has continued to fall to record lows. And the numbers are even worse than they may seem at first glance. As the industry has become further consolidated, many slaughtering plants no longer work with local producers. So not only do we have fewer slaughtering plants, but a lower percentage of them are actually willing to work with the type of growers that are going to sell their products at farmers markets. As this slide shows, about 85% of the beef packing industry, 66% of the pork packing industry, and 60% of the chicken industry are controlled by the top 4 companies in each respective sector. So how did we get here? there are several factors at play, but I'm going to focus on one of the major ones, our regulatory system. So first, let me start by explaining the basic outline of the system. There are three different types of facilities: federally inspected, state inspected, and custom or custom exempt. Products from federally inspected facilities can be sold anywhere in the country. The plants must be inspected according to federal standards and on a daily basis. Products from state-inspected facilities can only be sold within the state in which they're located, although there's a minor exception, which I'm not going to go into. And states are required to hold these facilities to the same standards, to standards that are at least equal to the federal ones. And finally, products from custom facilities can't be sold at all, although again, there's another minor exception, which I won't go into. But instead, animals at custom facilities can only be consumed by the owners of the animals and their guests. Custom plants are only inspected periodically, usually once or twice a year, and they're not held to the same standards as state and federal facilities, state and federally inspected facilities. And this basic framework hasn't changed at all since the Johnson administration. And the inspection system used during the Johnson administration, which relied on physically present inspectors to closely monitor the meat and the sanitary conditions of each plant, remained in place with little controversy and few changes until the 1990s, until this guy changed everything. As some of you might know, in 1993, there was a huge E. coli outbreak in which more than 600 people were sickened by hamburgers from Jack in the Box restaurants, and 4 children were killed. Jack in the Box lost $160 million over the following 18 months, and it's often credited as bringing E. coli and other pathogens that are found in meat to the public's attention for the first time. And the outbreak also prompted USDA to change their meat inspection program. In 1996, they issued a final ruling requiring all state and federally inspected meat and poultry plants to institute what are called HACCP systems by January of 2000. So what's HACCP? It stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. And it's a process that requires plants to identify hazards and then determine how to control, reduce, and prevent them. HACCP was originally created for NASA to ensure that its astronauts' food was free of pathogens. And upon its implementation in meatpacking plants, USDA claimed to be taking an outmoded 20th century inspection system into the 21st century. But there are some serious, extremely serious problems, both with HACCP and the way that it's been implemented, and I'm going to discuss 3 of the most significant ones. According to an excellent report by Food and Water Watch, many small plant owners have to spend a considerable amount of time and money responding to inconsistent USDA demands. Unlike many small plants, larger companies tend to focus on a few popular products for which there are well-established HACCP plans. They also have more resources to gather information and to negotiate considered consistent standards with USDA. The report also details how USDA often enforces the rules more stringently at smaller plants. Larger plants have political and financial and often legal resources that smaller plants don't have, and this often translates into greater flexibility for them. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, there are several ways in which the economies of scale that larger plants enjoy advantage them under the HACCP system. There are certain costs that are more or less constant regardless of how big your plant is. The requirement to provide scientific justification for certain components of your HACCP plan, for example, can require expensive research and expertise that small plants can't afford. HACCP's record-keeping requirements are also difficult for smaller plants. They must place a much higher percentage of their resources into record-keeping, which has put a number of them, especially the family-owned businesses, out of business. And so now, hopefully this chart, especially the last decade, starts to make a little more sense. HACCP, while not the only problem smaller plants face, has placed significant burdens on an already burdened industry. And I don't have time to go into some of the possible solutions during this presentation, but I want to recommend the Food and Water Watch report, which I referenced earlier and which you can find at that address. It has some excellent suggestions for policy change. The Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network website also has a lot of information about the obstacles that smaller plants face, both regulatory and otherwise. And the National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition has also done some great advocacy work on behalf of smaller plants. And of course, if you have any questions that we don't address during the Q&A, please, or comments that you'd like to send me, please feel free to email me at my email address. Thank you.
All right. My name is Margiana Petersen-Rockney, and I am, I think, the token farmer up here today. And I'll just give you a little bit about my background. I grew up on a small-scale dairy goat farm about an hour south of here, where we raised a lot of the food that we ate, including our own meat. And then for 4 years, I had a vegetable CSA and raised pastured hogs and chickens for meat. Today, I have been working for the past year in the nonprofit world with the New Entry Sustainable Farming Project, which works with beginning farmers to help them establish economically viable farm businesses in the Massachusetts area. The other thing that I do, and I think where I come at this from, is as a beginning farmer myself, when I started farming about 5 years ago, it really felt like there were a lot of beginning farmers out there. There's sort of this resurgence of local food and local agriculture and a lot of people who want to go back into farming. But it felt like we were all reinventing the wheel. So I started to organize a series of events called Young Farmer Nights, where beginning farmers got together and we shared our concerns and our problems and our ideas, and that has become the Young Farmer Network that I still organize with today. Okay, let's see this. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background on Massachusetts, because we've been talking about agriculture and specifically industrial meat production on a global scale, and then also here in the US. But I'm going to focus in a little bit and just give you some background on Massachusetts, because that's where we are. And in New England, we have a unique agricultural situation with these small states and small-scale producers. So Massachusetts is kind of an example that's similar to a lot of other New England states. We see small farms where the average farmer, or the average farm, not even the farmer, nets under $13,000 a year. So that's just a number to point out, because we're not talking about big producers here in the Northeast. In general, we're talking about small producers who are farming either as their full-time income or as part of other activities that they're doing. Some other interesting things about New England: we have a really high number of women farmers. Nationally, only about 14% of farmers are women, and here in New England, about 40% are women. We also have a really high number of beginning farmers. 1 in 4 farmers in New England or in Massachusetts is a beginning farmer. So we have a lot of opportunity to be sort of a leader in the region and a leader in creating a new agricultural system and a different agricultural system that is more sustainable economically, environmentally, and socially. Oh, I don't know why that was upside down. Sorry about that, guys. Well, you got it. So, beginning farmers. So that's where I'm coming at this from. And beginning farmers are a really diverse group of people. There are a lot of beginning farmers who are recent college graduates, but we also see a lot of beginning farmers who are second career farmers who have had another career or are retirees. There are also, in this area and around urban centers especially, there are a lot of new Americans, immigrant and refugee communities who are starting farm businesses. There are very few farmers today who grew up on farms. I feel very fortunate that I had that experience and that education, but most farmers who are starting out today did not grow up on farms and do not come from farming backgrounds and have an additional barrier of access to knowledge about agriculture. But because we have such a diverse array of farmers, of new farmers coming into the agricultural sector, we also have a lot of opportunity to have a really diverse array of knowledge and experiences and new ideas. All right, so now I'm gonna just lay out, these are just pictures, these are pictures of pigs on my farm. I'm just gonna lay out some of the big burdens to small-scale meat production, because that's really what we're talking about here in the Northeast are small-scale family farms. And quite a few of them are producing meat, but there are a lot of barriers. One big barrier that we face, probably the biggest, is that rules and regulations within the legal system are not scale appropriate, and the people who write those rules and regulations tend not to be farmers. So maybe we can get a show of hands here, not to put anyone on the spot, but who here is a farmer or comes from a farming family? So a couple of us. And that's a lot more than we see in a lot of the legal spaces where these rules and regulations are written. Another big issue is that these rules and regulations add a burdensome cost to farmers, which is especially an issue for small-scale farmers. You know, if you're part of a giant industrial, meat production facility, to comply with the sort of one-size-fits-all regulations that we see, that cost can be spread over a much larger operation. Where here in New England or with these small-scale family farms, the burdensome cost of regulation and all of the paperwork cannot be spread out. And that can put a lot of farmers out of business. Something else is because small-scale farmers don't have a lot of expendable cash, but tend to be resource-rich or asset-rich because a lot of farmers own land. We see this issue where farmers, if they face a legal issue, if a farmer is brought to court, most farmers in this part of the country cannot survive economically being brought to court. So if there is a legal issue, that often puts a farmer out of business. And as has been mentioned a few times before today, the legal, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But farmers don't have the legal support system in place to combat issues as they arise. You know, we see in the industrial meat industry, farmers and these giant companies are able to address issues and sort of have a big lobbying force and a big ability to withstand sort of the onslaught of the regulatory system in the way that small-scale farmers just aren't able to. So what do small-scale farmers do in order to survive? What we find is that a lot of the small-scale farmers and family farms that we work with find this gray area in the legal system in which to operate because they're not able to comply with all of the regulations. The legal system is set up in a way that leads to non-compliance. And one of the reasons is that it's easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission for a lot of small-scale farmers. So one example of this is a common practice that we see in the sort of alternative sphere of agriculture, especially in the CSA model, is that farmers will, for example, with meat, pre-sell their animals. So these are chickens on my farm. And what we would do, because we only raised a few hundred meat chickens a year, and with a few hundred meat chickens a year, we couldn't afford to invest in a USDA certified facility or even a state certified facility. So we would pre-sell our chickens while they were live. And then when the customers who already owned the live chickens came to pick them up, we would do them the friendly favor of slaughtering their birds for them. So this is an example of a creative way that small-scale farmers have kind of gotten around the legal barriers and are operating in this gray area of the law. But it does make farmers susceptible to sort of these issues around noncompliance with the rules and regulations that are in place and really don't make sense. These are just some other animals, meat animals on the farm. And just some takeaways. One thing is that it was mentioned earlier that local agriculture is not the solution, and I agree with that. So what we need to do with our food system moving forward is move towards a more regionally based food system where there's diversity along all chains of that food system and along all areas of that food system. And local agriculture and small-scale, sustainable family agriculture is one of a diversity of solutions. And also the ways that we talk about these issues need to be addressed in a diverse way. For example, there's opportunity and room for grassroots, lots of grassroots organizing to happen around these issues, as well as sort of top-down policy changes. And what we need are these factors to be in better communication and taking into account the various ways that we can address the challenges that we face in the food system. So another takeaway is that the legal system doesn't protect all consumers, all farmers. So it was mentioned earlier, we've been talking about today a lot how sort of farmers are bad is sort of something that I have felt like has been a takeaway. And there are a lot of farmers who, even in the industrial food production system, are growing food in a way that maybe we don't agree with, but there are reasons why they can't just stop doing that. So we need to think about how we can work together and how all different types of farmers are adding something to the system, and the ways that some farmers are more sustainable than others can be addressed. And every farming enterprise is unique, and there's something to be learned from everyone. And I think that I will leave it there, but we can ask questions.
Hi, thanks for having me here today. Are you all set? I'm Claire Benjamin with an organization called Food Policy Action. We have heard a lot today about the problems in our food system, and it is clear, if it wasn't before, that the way that we raise, slaughter, and distribute meat in this country is riddled with problems. I'm particularly glad to be here to talk on a panel about solutions, and in particular about empowering consumers, or as I like to call them, voters. So for the last 10 years, I worked on Capitol Hill for 3 very good food policy leaders, Patrick Leahy, Peter Welch, and then most recently for the last 5 years for Congresswoman Shelley Pingree as her legislative director. And Congresswoman Pingree came to office in 2008 with a unique background as an organic farmer from the great state of Maine. Maine, like many parts of the country, has seen a tremendous growth in sustainable farming in the last several years. Maine is bucking trends. The average age of the farmer is going down while the number of acres in cultivation is going up. The number of farmers markets, CSAs, farm-to-table establishments are all on the rise. Consumers are changing the marketplace through their purchasing decisions, and that is something that we're seeing in all parts of the country. But despite the growing demand and the shifts in consumer choices, federal policy, as we've talked about a lot today, has just not kept up. So 4 years ago, Shelley Pingree asked me to work with farmers and consumer groups to put together a bill that she fondly called the Local Food Title to the Farm Bill, or the Local Farms Food and Jobs Act. And we worked with 30-plus organizations looking for policies that were necessary, that were politically feasible, and that would constitute actual progress for farmers and for consumers. And so among the dozens of policies that made up that bill, we included 4 provisions on meat and poultry. So this was technical assistance, guidance, additional public information, and a report to Congress that really started to outline additional steps that can be taken to better meet the needs of small processors. So we are talking about a report, technical assistance, and a website. This was not sweeping reform, and in many ways, this was really the lowest common denominator. We intentionally presented nonpartisan solutions that would legitimately help with some of the most common and frustrating problems among small-scale processors. And while I am proud to report that many of the provisions in that larger bill did make it into the final version of the Farm Bill, we were met with incredible opposition on both sides of the aisle on these meat and poultry processing provisions. And even when we tried to make very modest reforms, we were just, at every step of the way, it was a non-starter to the Ag Committee leadership and in Congress. So why is this the case? Why, despite consumer demand, no-cost policy solutions, was Ag Committee leadership able to dismiss us so effectively? And while there are a number of factors at play here, I think a large part of the answer to that is because no one is showing up on Election Day because of food. There is no accountability, and there are no political repercussions for being really just terrible on these issues. And my main point here is if we are going to expect better policy and better food policy, we have to work together to elect more food policy leaders and make these issues matter in Washington. We have to make food a political issue. So the organization that I work for now, Food Policy Action, is doing just that, or we're starting to. We are holding Congress accountable for their votes on food policy, and we're educating voters through the publication of the National Food Policy Scorecard. The scorecard provides nonpartisan factual information on how your elected officials are voting on a full range of policy issues. So we score votes from everything from ending hunger in America to the humane treatment of farm animals. We cover a whole range of issues. We are also uniting a wide array of food policy leaders on all of these different issues with the shared goal of arming the public with the tools that they need to hold legislators accountable. So these are our board, and it's leaders like Wayne Pacelli from the Humane Society and Ken Cook from the Environmental Working Group, Eric Olson from NRDC. Ultimately, we want to send a message to Washington that these issues matter, and they matter to voters, and they can matter in elections. Here you can see the 2013 scorecard. In 2013 we scored 12 votes in the House and 7 votes in the Senate, and I am sad to say that 224 House and Senate members received a score of less than 50%. So that means that even when presented with good food policy options and the opportunity to vote, nearly 50% of Congress is still voting against our values. So ultimately, we want legislators to conclude that a poor performance on the scorecard is a significant liability and a good score is a valuable asset. So there are many food policy failures, 224 to be exact, but there are also some good food policy champions. 87 members of the House and Senate received perfect scores in 2013, but there's obviously still a lot of work to do. It gives us the opportunity to support these food policy leaders and leaders like some of these folks, Rosa DeLauro, Shelley Pingree, Senators Tester and Blumenthal. So, we believe that by arming the public with the information and standing up for better policy, these issues can matter in Washington as much as they do in communities across the country. we all come to this discussion on food policy from different backgrounds. We are parents and teachers and students and lawyers, but we are all eaters and we are all voters. And I hope you will join me for fighting for a better food system for all. And I do guarantee you that the first time that somebody loses because they were bad on food policy, Washington will start to pay attention. Thank you.
So thank you all. Those were fantastic and stimulating presentations, and we're going to go to some questions directed by me briefly, and then we'll get to some audience questions. I may as well start with Nate first. So you talked about the difficulty of farmers who don't want to necessarily go through the USDA inspection process. The next option is to go through a state inspection process that is at least as strict as the USDA. And then there's the other option to custom slaughter, in which case you can't, for the most part, sell your meat. How would you improve, change, modify, abolish that system?
Well, I don't think that that framework is necessarily the problem. I think the federal standards are the problem. So, and just abolishing the federal standards, and doing nothing else, at least at the state level, I think could create a lot of other problems. And I don't think that would necessarily be optimal in terms of food safety and protecting consumers. So I think we need to find a way that could protect consumers while at the same time making it easier for smaller plants. And so I really think that eventually we'll have to take action at the federal level.
All right. Would anyone else like to address that? All right. No? Okay. Let's move on. Margiana, what are, you described some of the most onerous regulations. What would you say is probably the one most onerous regulation for a small farmer like yourself trying to bring meat to market?
I think the biggest issue, especially for farmers here in the Northeast, but probably across the country, is access to slaughtering facilities. In Massachusetts, there's only one inspected slaughter facility, and neighboring states it's similar. So for a lot of farmers, they have to travel hundreds of miles to go to a slaughter facility where they can have their animals processed, and that is very stressful on the animal and a huge burden to the farmer. So if I were to change one thing, it would be to have more slaughter facilities that can handle the animals that are in demand now by consumers who want local, healthy meat.
Thanks. And would either of you like to respond to? You're good?
I'll defer to the farmer.
That seems fair. So Claire, why hasn't Congress acted to reduce some of the regulatory barriers to sustainably and humanely raised meat?
Because we need to elect more food policy leaders. It is complicated. There is very good advocacy out there, and you mentioned a few, National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. The truth is, we're in Congress and in the lobbying effort, we're just outgunned. And that's a money and politics issue. And so, NRDC does great work. There's a lot of organizations that do incredibly good work, especially around the Farm Bill. But until we are able to sort of elevate the conversation and have Congress and our elected officials understand that these are really important issues to all of us and they are issues that we vote on, I don't believe that we'll see the change that we all sort of expect from our elected officials.
Others want to respond? No? So I'm thinking, and this came to my mind during, I think, each of your presentations, the USDA inspection process for something like 80 years, the process was that an inspector would poke a piece of meat and sniff it, and if it smelled okay, then they would poke the next piece of meat. And so essentially they were transferring bacteria from animal to animal and sickening people. And there was other, I think, news in 2008 or so that some slaughterhouses hadn't been inspected like they were supposed to for a mere 30 years. I'm just wondering, how much faith do you have that the USDA inspection process is an effective food safety tool? and this is for everyone.
I mean, I think it's currently suboptimal, but I don't think that there are any other effective ways. So I mean, I think it's underfunded, and I think its methods could be improved upon. But I think it's an issue that needs to be approached at the federal level.
Okay. Others want to respond?
You know, when we talk about food safety, one of the biggest complications is that meat and poultry is regulated by the USDA, and then basically all other food, including fish, is regulated under the FDA. And so this is just going to create redundancy and problems. And so I think we all have to have some faith in the inspection process in the food system, but it is not ideal. It is not funded properly, and it is certainly not perfect.
And I think another thing that was mentioned before is if the regulations and if the inspections were scale appropriate, we would see that more of the resources for inspections would be spent on these large-scale producers. And the way it is now, those large-scale producers and those industrial companies have a lot of force to find loopholes and sort of avoid the level of inspection that an inspector is able to do and sort of enforce for a small-scale processing facility. So those small-scale processing facilities tend to bear a greater burden of the regulatory cost than those large-scale, sort of when broken down by scale.
I want to ask this before I forget. Claire, who gets the lowest score?
There are a lot of zeros out there. And if you go to foodpolicyaction.org, you can download the scorecard. I have a couple extra copies here, but you know, it was more than 65 members of Congress received zeros. So they are voting against these issues 100% of the time.
I guess the Margiana, the beg forgiveness, don't ask permission first thing is always, I think, the sign of bad regulations and either sort of inept or bad regulators, bad legislators. How can you change that?
Well, I think it's hard because farmers are already entrepreneurs who have to handle a lot of different, have to have a really wide skill set. And so asking for one more thing, such as becoming a more active voice in the policy and in the ways that rules and regulations are set, is sort of asking for one more thing from people who are already sort of handling a lot. So I think that it's tricky, but what needs to happen is farmers need to be part of the conversation about making the rules and regulations and the policy make sense for them and for their type of operation. And I think that that needs to be both grassroots, about farmers becoming more involved in those policy conversations and decisions, and also top-down about lawmakers and regulators being more open to include the voices of farmers in making those decisions.
You, Claire, talked about the Farm Bill, and one of the key components that's, I think, or perhaps one of the more controversial components, certainly of the Farm Bill is farm subsidies. What role, if any, do farm subsidies have, and this is for all of you here, in sort of twisting the food system and restricting access to sustainable and humanely raised meat?
Subsidies are predominantly, when we talk about them, are not about meat production necessarily. They're about the commodity crops. But corn obviously plays a big part in that, as it goes, most of the corn, and soy goes to feeding cattle and poultry. I'm not sure I have a good answer to your question, except that they're all incredibly linked, and it's complicated.
I think that was a good answer to my question. Thank you. And what are some of the unintended consequences of federal meat regulations? This is for anyone.
A good example, and this isn't about meat, but it's about recently passed, or 2 years ago, Food Safety Modernization Act. And this put enormous burdens on farmers. It was the rules were completely written by the FDA, which really, there aren't a lot of people at the FDA that know a lot of farmers. And so when they wrote the regulations, they were completely scale inappropriate. And there were so many unintended consequences and it was in large part because the people writing the regulations were really unaware of some of these unique and entrepreneurial models that farmers are using now. So the CSAs that are multi-farm CSAs, and they all go and pack in one facility, and so that was going to be illegal all of a sudden. And if you cut your greens with scissors, but not, but they weren't, regulated scissors, that was going to be illegal. And so there were all of these unintended consequences as a result of a well-intended bill that were scale inappropriate. And there's some good news there too. And I know we're talking about meat and not fruits and vegetables, but they are all things we eat. And the good news story there was those unintended consequences trickled down. There was a comment period. Farmers came out in droves and they said, listen, this isn't going to work. If these are the size and the scope of the regulations, we will go out of business. And because of the loud voices of some of the small farmers and good advocates on the Hill and good advocacy organizations, a lot of those rules have been rewritten, and they are still not perfect, but you were able to see some real change there.
I think of the brewery issue of late. I saw the beer, if you're not familiar with this. Brewers tend to use their food waste and give it to farmers, sell it to farmers for the purpose of feeding happy, cows and pigs. And the Food Safety Modernization Act rules have been threatening that. And groups as diverse as the National Milk Producers Foundation and the Beer Institute, I think just this week, wrote comments to the FDA in opposition. So that's good news there. I'm going to open things up. I want to just ask this question of the panelists, but not for them to answer, just sort of a think thing, because this interests me specifically, which is what if the federal government got out of regulating intrastate meat and simply regulated interstate commerce, like I argue the Commerce Clause permits and requires it to do, and just left regulation of local meat to states. So with that, I will open it up to questions, please.
This is for Claire. I am so excited about what you are doing. It's really amazing. And, money in politics cannot be underestimated. It's a huge problem. It seems like a theme of the conference has been that what's good for people is good for the environment and it's good for animals. It's all combined. We are all in an ecosystem, whether we pretend to be or not. And so there are cost savings for healthcare. There's improvements to the environment. There's improvements to animal welfare. They all stand to benefit from what you're doing. I love groups that kind of bring everyone together. So how is everybody working together? And are you reaching out to business interests, to folks who really can stand to profit from industrial ag, maybe not winning all the time on Capitol Hill, and local farmers and others kind of taking more central
We
stage?
have a diverse board, and there's a lot of ways that we're looking at different partnerships depending on the organization. We're certainly not meant to replace good advocacy. We want to be sort of the political side of a lot of the good work that's happening on the advocacy side. But one of our best arguments to business owners, especially in the natural food and organic space, is that because of subsidies, your products are twice as much in the marketplace than everyone else. And so the sooner that we are able to level the playing field on an issue like subsidies, the better off your bottom line is. And so I think we have a lot of good cases to make to those types of companies.
Cool. Other questions, please?
Yeah, this is just a question for Claire. So I think the scorecard is really exciting, but the thing with it, because it keeps people accountable and it teaches people how their legislators are voting. But one thing about scorecards, sometimes it simplifies it to a point where people don't know what you're scoring. So just using subsidies as an example, subsidies could be maybe good for farmers, but maybe not good for animals or the planet and stuff. So how did your organization look at subsidies and include those in the scorecard? Good, bad?
So we have a vote advisory council that is made up of a lot of lobbyists and advocates in Washington, and they look at the full body of votes that happened in a given year. And so last year we did the Farm Bill for the second time, and within that there was votes to curb subsidies, to reform subsidies both for crop insurance and then for sort of the traditional subsidies. And those were, if you voted for reform, you were scored positively.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of whether we can reduce dependence on industrial agriculture and industrial animal farming, it seems depends on what the average consumer wants to do. Small-scale beef and chicken, locally raised beef and chicken can cost 50% more than industrially raised beef. How do you market it? What do you say to the average consumer, the middle-class consumer, most of whom are quite price-sensitive, why they should suddenly start spending 30, 40, 50% more per pound on their beef and chicken? I mean, I'm sure a lot of us here do, but perhaps we're the choir. What do you say to the average consumer?
Well, I think that unfortunately we see in sort of the local food economy that the first people who can afford food that has to have a premium, because especially again here in New England with land prices so high and all of the other costs to raising food in this area, the price has to be higher in order for the farmer to even come close to making a living wage farming and pay their labor fairly. But I think that as we progress and as we grow a food system that is more regionally focused and where we sort of even the playing field, and a key part of that is through the changes in regulations and through the changes in policy, as we even the playing field, the cost difference between the industrial produced meat and local, or sustainably produced meat, that cost difference will start to that cost difference will start to balance out. In the meantime, I think that it is a tricky thing to tell people, you should spend more on this product. I think that there are arguments for it, and I think that there are opportunities for education around the importance of keeping money in your local economy and the health benefits of eating meat from animals that are not, treated with all of these antibiotics and things like that. But I think that this is a tricky subject and nobody has a great answer to it yet. But I think that as we move forward, we will start to address these issues sort of on a systems level.
I think we have time for one long or two brief questions.
This question is for Claire again. You said earlier you were outgunned from time to time at the federal level. I'm wondering, do you mean there's simply too many issues and you can't raise it to the level, or are there specific industry interests that are outgunning it?
I think that when you compare the money that gets spent on lobbying for, let's just say, our bucket of issues, sustainable agriculture, and then the industry specific, whether it be the pork industry or the beef industry, there is so much more money being dumped into the resources to just bombard the Hill. And they win. They win when you go dollar for dollar, but where I think we can make inroads, and this is the long game, right? This is not what we're going to do this election cycle or even next election cycle. This is over the long term, is if we make these issues matter in elections, they will be more important to them in Congress.
Last word? Yes.
This is for Claire. So, going off of that, what are you doing to be more grassroots and to get people to actually care to vote for food? I'm just curious what you're doing at the local level to have people want to even consider the scorecard and vote for food.
So it's a big, this is a like I said, a long-term strategy, and the first thing we want to do is educate consumers that there is a scorecard. So we want to get this in the hands of more people. We'll invest significant resources this year on building our grassroots capacity, and that means partnering with organizations. So whether it be chefs or environmentalists, we believe that these are sort of value-based issues, and a lot of people care about them, but don't quite know that they can be voting issues yet. So we'll, like any good new organization, we will devote resources to growing our online presence, in grassroots capacity. And then, then it's a question of tactics. So if we want to prove the point that these issues can matter in elections, well, then we have to make them matter in an election. And so we pick a race like Mitch McConnell or Bill Owens' open seat or whatever district it is, and we engage with people on the ground there, and we press this message that, did you know this person is voting against your values over and over and over again, and figure out which messages resonate in those parts of the country. So it's not a cookie cutter approach, and we have a lot of growing to do.
Bonus round, we have time for one quick question. Yes.
I actually just have a comment. I appreciate basically what you said about, and this is from Margiana, that you have to get the farmers involved, because that's the biggest thing. There's some comments that have been made through these presentations regarding the human doctors, the veterinarians, and public policy, public health, and kind of getting everybody on board. And I think you brought up a good point, so thank you for coming and also bringing the farmers' perspective on it. So that's, I guess, my biggest point is to make sure that we have everybody from different sectors working on it, and that's maybe where solutions will actually start occurring.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Please give a panelists here a warm hand. Thank you, sir.